Yes. Good afternoon. First of all, I want to thank the Bhutan Ecos Festival for inviting me and allowing me to start discovering this country which has such a strong personality. I also want to thank Her Majesty, the Queen Mother, the India-Bhutan Foundation, the Spanish Embassy for their help, and you all in the audience for your attendance. I'm going to try to answer this question: what do women writers write about? And I'll start by telling you a personal story. I have always wanted to be a writer. This is me at the age of 5 or 6, writing my first short story that I still remember. And you may ask, why this? Why such a clear and early vocation? The answer is rather obvious. My mother was a great reader. She always had a book in her hands. And so from a very early age, I had this idea that there was something fascinating between the covers of books, something that I was longing to know. And also, I was a bit jealous, because my mother seemed to love books better than people, including me. Therefore, since a very early age, my vocation was clear. I wanted to be a book, or at least, if that was not possible, to write books. So I grew up in a household full of books, because both my parents, most my mother, but my father too, were great readers. And I grew accustomed to a process of knowing about life by reading before experiencing life. So before I started living, so to speak, I knew what to expect because I had read books about the main experiences that awaited me. For example, we were in admiration of French culture, and I always had dreamed of knowing Paris, but before going to Paris, I already knew about Paris because I had read the novels of Balzac or of Proust. The same, of course, for love. Before falling in love, I had read a lot about love. Next, please. My knowledge of illness and death came, of course, also through books. The same about experiences that I did not know and I hope I'll never know directly, such as war. I knew about war reading novels. I had an idea of what it was like to be a writer because I had read James Joyce's Portrait of an Artist as a young man, or Marcel Proust's Remembrance of Things Past, whose main characters are young men who struggle to be writers. Oh, sorry. If I ever wanted to become an adulteress, I also knew what to expect, because I had read these famous novels about adulteresses. I even read a lot about the dangers of reading a lot. For example, this is one of the main themes of the great Spanish novel Don Quixote, or of Madame Bovary. The only trouble with all this was that I wanted to become a writer, and I had this somewhat irritating idea that everything had already written about, that there was nothing new under the sun of literature, and that I could not write anything that was not hackneyed, that was not an old subject with long centuries of literary history. Then something happened. I became pregnant. My first impulse, of course, as usual, was to look for the great novels about pregnancy. And where were they? And about birth, I gave birth to a daughter. and I still looked about those great novels that should have told me what to expect and could have allowed me to compare my own experience with what books and novels said about it. So I looked and looked. Next, please. I didn't find anything. The only thing that I did find was silly self-help books and magazines full of silly stories and tips, which were very useful. In fact, they were practical, but they lacked the depth, the emotion, the nobility of great literature. So I was at first very bemused, disoriented, disappointed. Next, please. And then, in a long process that actually took me a couple of years of thinking, reflection, research, I came to the conclusion that so far the literature I had read was not exclusively but mainly male literature, and that male literature dealt with human experiences, of course, such as love and death. Also, it dealt with male experiences, such as travel. Of course, women can travel too, but historically, those who have traveled, conquered, discovered countries have been men, or war, which has been waged by men, or power, the struggle of power for power is a very male experience, or the relationship between fathers and sons. But I discovered that there was something lacking in literature, which was, next please, female experience. Where could I find these female experiences in literature? Fortunately, by chance, a friend of mine made me a gift, which was a book. This book, Close Company, Stories of Mothers and Daughters, which, as its title suggests, compiles short stories and also excerpts from novels, diaries, essays, and poems about the relationship between mothers and daughters. So there was, after all, some literature about female experiences, but what was strange was that it was all written by women. Up to that moment, I had always thought that literature had nothing to do with sex, with the sexes. I say sex, not gender, for reasons that I can explain if you're interested in the question and answer time. I thought, everybody seemed to think, that there was no male or female literature because you don't write with your body, you write with your imagination, therefore with your mind. But then I discovered that things are not so simple, because you do write with imagination and with your mind, but your mind belongs to a body, and this body does not directly influence your writing, but it does influence or almost sometimes determine your place in society and your experiences. And you do write with your experiences. And even when you imagine from your experience, from what you have lived. So, I compiled a similar book in Spanish called Madres e Hijas, which was a great success. I was very happy about it. And I was also very happy because I had finally been able to answer the question of what I could write about. Of course, I could write about anything that I wanted, but in what sort of topics, of themes, I could do something new. I discovered that there was a whole stream of women writers, all of them modern, recent, that were writing about women's experiences. And I started reading them, and they inspired me a lot. What are those experiences? Sorry, back please. What are those experiences that are typical, specific of women? Well, the most obvious, of course, is motherhood. For example, these two novels, this one by the British author Rachel Cusk, or this one by the Nigerian author Buchi Emecheta, tell about motherhood. Next, please. or the experience, which is shared by millions of women, of being a housewife and a mother, sometimes reluctantly, as it was in my case. I never intended to become one, but for different circumstances that I afterwards tried to understand with hindsight, I had become one. So I wrote about this novel, autobiographical novel, called, in English it would be, It Was Not Going to Happen to Me. Or the Nobel Prize French author Annie Ernaux had written about the same subject, this book, A Frozen Woman. Next, please. Another subject tackled by women authors is women's friendships. Mary McCarthy, for example, the American author, wrote about it, her novel The Group, about some schoolgirls, schoolmates who meet many years afterwards, or about the same subject. I wrote not exactly the same, but the friendship of two girls who then become women. I wrote my novel Between Friends. Next, please. Another subject is suffering violence. For example, this very beautiful book called A Woman in Berlin is the real diary of a German journalist who was in Berlin when the Russian troops came in 1945 at the end of Second World War and raped a lot of women. She was among them, and she recounts the experience. Or I recently read an Indian novel by Meena Kandasamy entitled When I Hit You, which is a very intelligent novel. I hope it's not autobiographical because it's a very hard novel about a battered wife. Next, please. Another character that appears in female literature is the old woman, a character that in literature written by men is rare and is usually very negative. It's usually the bitch or the old witch. Or sometimes the idealized granny. Whereas in women's literature, the old woman is a subject by herself. We see her in her own terms as a human being, as we do in these two beautiful novels, one by British author Jean Rhys, Good Morning Midnight, and another by another British author, Doris Lessing, The Grandmothers. Next, please. Also, the condition of woman writer, how to be a writer being a woman, which maybe looks like a silly question, but it isn't, it's rather complex, was tackled by Sylvia Plath in her diary, a book that I love and that has influenced me very much, and which encouraged me to publish my own diaries, which I started doing a few years ago. This is the third volume, no, this is the fourth and the most recent volume. Please, next. Also, something that many women writers have engaged in is rewriting history with women in it, because history is usually told forgetting the women, as if women did not exist, or what they do was of no interest or was not historical, as if women did always the same and there was no point in talking about it. But these authors have written some parts of history, including women and giving them the main roles. For example, Nigerian author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie wrote a novel that is set in her own country in the period of the Civil War, and the women characters have important roles. Or Angelica Schrobsdorf, I don't know how to pronounce it, wrote the story of her mother in Germany under Nazism. A very beautiful book. You Are Not Like Other Mothers. Next, please. Two more examples of the same are the memoir by Yung Chang, the Chinese author, about the three women in her family. She recounts the history of China through these three women. Or the Nobel Prize, the Russian writer Svetlana Alexievich made extensive research and wrote this novel, or well, I don't know if it's a novel, it's a book, but a very gripping book about women soldiers in Russia under the Second World War. Next, please. I have read extensively women's literature since I discovered that it existed and that it had its own topics. Of course, it has many more topics. I am not saying that women write exclusively about specific women's experiences. I'm rather saying that they include women's experiences and characters inside what is general literature. But reading, as I say, extensively, I realized that there is a difference between Western literature and non-Western one, in the sense that non-Western female authors have a subject that comes up again and again, which is the tension between the individual and the community. Dr. Dorji mentioned this subject, explored this subject in his very interested presentation yesterday. But I think, well, he talked in general terms, but I think there's something specific to be said for non-Western women. In this tension between individual freedom, individual projects, individual life, and the community, the family, and the tradition exists in all societies. But the difference is that in Western societies, in theory, we have decided that individual freedom is more important. Maybe in practice, well, surely, in practice, this is not always the case, and women find it difficult to have their own individual projects and at the same time having a family. But I think in non-Western countries, it is still, the tension is stronger, and it is a very important subject that women writers explore. I think that men can have an individual life, and at the same time, they may have a family, because there are women who take care of the family. But for the women themselves, they live this tension in their own case, because they cannot be at the same time a completely free individual and responsible for a family unit and for a tradition and the rules of the community. And I found it very clearly expressed in novels such as this one by a Senegalese writer, a novel about a French woman who marries a Senegalese man, trying to be accepted by his family and failing. Or this novel by a Catalan Spanish writer who is an immigrant from Morocco and who writes about this dilemma of either being a member of the new society in which a woman can have more freedom, or remaining in her own community, which is a cocoon, which is warm, which is protective, but which stifles her. Next, please. I will finish with the example of this novel, a very beautiful Indian novel that I have read recently as well, by Anita Nair. I'm sure I pronounce it wrongly. The title is Ladies Coupé. And it is the story of 6 women who don't know each other, but meet by chance because they share a compartment in a train that is only for ladies. They belong to different generations, different castes, different social class. They have different personalities. They all tell their stories. And in this book, there is a question that comes up constantly. And in fact, when I read it, I realized that maybe in this novel it is more explicit, but it is the case generally in women's novels that this question comes up. The question is, what is being a woman? What does it mean? Am I a real woman? Next, please. Am I woman enough? What is the best life for a woman? Must women sacrifice their own desires and needs for those of others? These are questions explicitly put in this book. Is being loved compensation enough for not having a life of one's own. There's a funny question I ask myself when preparing this presentation. When preparing this presentation and concentrating on this last slide, I ask myself, how come women ask these questions about themselves, about womanhood, and in male novels, in men's writing, I don't find the same question. And I have two different answers. I don't know which is right, if any. One is that the condition of woman has been imposed, and therefore it is, has much more conflict in it. There is much more contradiction in it. I mean, I have the impression that men can choose more, and therefore they have less questions about it because they have chosen freely, whereas women never know whether they have chosen or they have just accepted what was being imposed upon them. So this would be the sense of this question. And the other possible answer is that masculinity does not question itself. I mean that one tenet of masculinity is that you do not doubt, or at least you do not show doubts about what is to be a man. Well, my general conclusion is that, as Martha Nussbaum, a philosopher, has said, we need literature to know other people, to have empathy and compassion to other people, because otherwise, if we do not read about other people or see films or know other people by their representation, I mean, directly we don't know much about other people. We tend to live in the bubble of those who are similar to us. So democracy, equality, compassion needs all sorts of experiences to be represented. And this has not been, and is not the case. In fact, if you look back to history, you will realize that we know very little about the lives of women, because as I told you before, history is usually written as if women did not exist or were unimportant. And also, we know very little about the low classes, the servants, and the slaves. So I think that literature, which is wonderful and which enhances and allows us to share a human experience, should be all-encompassing, and it should be as democratic as possible, in the sense that it should include the experiences in the first person of all sorts of people. In the case of women, I can tell you that this is far from being the case. For example, in Spain, only, what would you say, out of 10 books, how many are authored by women? Is it 10%? Is it 90%? Is it 50%? Well, it's 26%. So I encourage you all to discover this realm of women's literature, which is so rich and so surprising. And I encourage the women among you to write, the men as well, but maybe you need less encouragement. And with this, I finish, thanking you for your attention. I think we have some time for questions. Yes?
Can you recognize me?
No. I'm.
Okay, I was on the same seat on the plane from Delhi.
Oh yes.
Yes.
So you managed to come.
Yes.
Because you told me. Of course, I remember him perfectly. The first psychiatrist in Bhutan.
All right, that's it.
Yes.
And I told you that it was difficult to get into this this conference. I tried 3 months ago. So I just came physically, but not to share my ideas anyway. You were so busy reading The Lonely Planet.
Yes.
And you were underlying every word.
Yes.
Now you are here in Bhutan for the 3rd day. All right. what can you tell about women in Bhutan? That's the question. What did you get from what you read and what you saw?
About Bhutan in general, or?
Women in Bhutan.
Women in Bhutan. Well, I have the impression that there is more equality here than in many Western countries. For example, I always, when I'm invited to a festival, I always count how many women and men take part in the program, and there is more or less equality, so I was pleasantly surprised by that. I also see many women participating in whatever activities, and I have read that very often when a man and a woman marry, it is the man who goes to the woman's house and lives with her family, and that women inherit property. So I hope you are going to keep this wonderful equality.
Hello, my name is Tanin Samfel, and currently I'm one of volunteers for Bhutan Echo. So at the last slide, there was a question that what does being a woman really means? I mean, like, there have been many definitions that says that mostly we are labeled as someone who's really nurturing and caring. But beside those labels, can you describe, like, according to you, what does being a woman really means? That's my question. Thank you.
A very simple question that I can answer in 1 minute. What is a woman? What being a woman is? Well, I think that being a woman means having one sort of body. There are two sorts. Human beings are divided into different sorts of bodies. So being a woman is clearly having one sort of body, and this body influences our experience. For example, we can experience motherhood, or our sexual experience is different from a man's. And all the rest, I mean, this is something that is material and undisputable. I think it is obvious. All the rest has been added, and we could do away with it. I mean, for all the rest, we should be free to develop our personality and be or not a caring person. For instance, I'm not a caring person. I have been with my children, but I have no vocation of nurturing, and I don't think I can do it as a duty, but it should not be expected of me just because I am a woman. So I think we must both, on the one hand, recognize these sexual differences, the biological difference, because they exist and they are important, and on the other hand, try to give everybody, irrespective of their biological sex, all the possibilities. Thank you.
I'm a bit nervous right now, but like, why does the society expect sacrifices from women most of the time for their family or loved ones, while men are known to be free birds and like society does not expect them to make sacrifices? And then like, I know some men who have sacrificed for their loved ones, but they are told that they don't need to sacrifice, and then like, they're ridiculed for being sacrificed, like, whereas women are expected to do so. Why is it like that? And like, sorry, so like.
Well, again, a very simple question. This has a long history. But what I want to say is that life is not possible without caring and nurturing. You know that a famous anthropologist was asked, what is the first proof that what were animals have become humans in the distant past. And instead of saying, for example, the silex tool, she said the first proof that those beings who were animals have become what we consider human is that we have found a bone of a leg that has been was broken and has been put in shape again, because this means that a person, well, or an animal, it was in between, broke his or her leg, and instead of being abandoned by the others, as would happen among the animals, this person or this being was taken care of. Someone fed him and helped him or her. And so this compassion, this nurturing, is the beginning of humanity. So I think the problem and the misunderstanding with women's liberation is that it is generally understood as women acting as men do, privileging their own individual freedom and not taking care of others. But this is impossible, because society cannot exist if we do not take care of each other. So I think that half of women's liberation is on good way, in the sense that women are advancing and they are conquering new professions, ranks, etc. But what is failing and has not developed yet is the other half, which is men accepting the duty of caring.
Thank you so much.
So that was all, my friends. Thank you very much again for your attention.